We're going to be moving on to Henry VI, Part 2, and there are a couple of things to notice about the play right away. First off, the telescoping of time and events, which we saw happening in the last play, is happening here too. In Act 1, we see the Duke of York's position as the regent of France taken away because a peace with France has just been agreed to. And then, just 2 scenes later, King Henry is debating whether to make York the regent of France again, or someone else. And we're told that this peace with France, or this truce, was going to be for a period of 18 months. So already, in Act 1, at least a year has passed between these scenes, and maybe more. So that's one thing to keep in mind. The telescoping is going to continue. Another thing to notice about the play is that it has the largest cast of characters out of any of Shakespeare's plays. There are a lot of names to juggle, and a lot of relationships to keep in mind as we go through cycles of alliances and backstabbing. And this is because Shakespeare was interested here in presenting a play about politics, not about people so much. So what do I mean by that? In the past plays that we've studied, the emphasis has been on character, either on the grandeur of a character or on a character's weaknesses. We followed Richard II, Prince Hal, Falstaff, and others, right? But here, the emphasis is more on the moral, or on the theme. And the theme is about, again, this idea of a cycle. Violence breeding violence, revenge breeding revenge, and ambition breeding chaos. As a political drama, we see things taking place that are still taking place today in our own politics. There are riots orchestrated by scheming noblemen who are so bent on destroying their rival factions that they don't seem to mind ruining the country to do so. We see weak wills, helpless to defy or reason with strong wills, and much, much more besides. And I think that this is where the interest in this play lies. Not in following the journey of a particular character or marking a particular character's growth, like maybe Prince Hal into Henry V, but in following these patterns, seeing the cycles, and exploring how Shakespeare highlights these through the dialogue and through the pacing. So, the first scene really sets the stage for the breakdown of England into special interests and factions that's going to follow shortly. Suffolk has returned from France with Margaret to present her to King Henry, as he said he would do in the last play. And there was apparently some sort of initiation ceremony that has already taken place in which Suffolk stood for Henry and married her in his name. He mentions that he was but a shadow representing the substance of a true king during that ceremony. Really similar, you'll remember, to Talbot's speech in the last play about how his own solitary body was but a shadow of his true self, which was his army. So, being a subject of the King of England and embedded with authority by him, Suffolk was acting here as a representative of the king himself. And he's already profited greatly from this. In the last play, he was only an earl. Now he is made a duke and a marquess, both higher ranks of nobility than the one that he had had initially. And he also seems to have a very close relationship to Queen Margaret. Throughout this first act, he never leaves her side. And so his plan, which if you'll remember from the last play was kind of twofold, it seems to be working. One person who isn't happy with this arrangement is Gloucester. When he learns what this marriage has cost the realm, he gives a lament that sounds a bit like the lament of John of Gaunt all the way back in Richard II. he waxes nostalgic about the heroic deeds of his brothers and of the noblemen around him, how much they've all sacrificed to save France, now all in vain. And he's similarly positioned to John of Gaunt as well. You'll remember that Gaunt was one of the only surviving brothers of a great warrior, Edward the Black Prince, and in his dying days he was forced to watch the decay of morals and order in the court and country around him. And we read about all of that again back in Richard II. The Duke of Gloucester here is also the last surviving brother of a great warrior, Henry V, and he seems to be the only one here who has his eye on the real prize, which is honoring his brother's legacy and working to achieve glory for England. So he trails off stage in a bit of a depression, and then follows what seems to me almost a comedic exit of the other nobles, one at a time, in which they each express their intentions to betray one another as they're going. So Gloucester leaves, and the Cardinal of Winchester turns around and says to the other nobles, "Can you guys believe that? We can't trust Gloucester. He's only mad about this marriage because he's next in line to rule if Henry doesn't have any kids. So we should all work together to thwart his ambition." And you can imagine that all the others are probably nodding along with him, signaling their agreement. And then Winchester leaves. And after that, Somerset and Buckingham immediately say, "Well, yeah, we don't like Gloucester, certainly, but we can't really trust Winchester either. After all, he's not too far down in the line of succession himself, and he's ambitious too." And once again, the other nobles are all probably nodding, saying, "Oh yeah, good point." And then those two leave. And then Salisbury and Warwick, who are father and son, by the way, both of the Neville family, they turn to York and say, "Well, really, we can't trust any of them. We only want what's best for the land. Are you with us?" And York says, "Oh yeah, sure." And then they leave. So the battle lines and allegiances are already being drawn in this opening scene. And then finally, Richard of York has the stage all to himself, and he addresses the audience in soliloquy. And it's revealed, or rather we're reminded of this from the last play, that he has greater ambitions than all of them. He says this: "Anjou and Maine are given to the French. Paris is lost. The state of Normandy stands on a tickle point now they are gone. Suffolk concluded on the articles, the peers agreed, and Henry was well pleased to change 2 dukedoms for a duke's fair daughter. I cannot blame them all. What is it to them? 'Tis thine they give away, and not their own. Pirates may make cheap pennyworths of their pillage, and purchase friends, and give to courtesans, still revelling like lords till all be gone, while as the silly owner of the goods weeps over them, and wrings his hapless hands, and shakes his head, and trembling stands aloof, while all is shared, and all is borne away, ready to stir, and dare not touch his own. So York must sit, and fret, and bite his tongue, while his own lands are bargained for and sold. Methinks the realms of England, France, and Ireland bear that proportion to my flesh and blood, as did the fatal brand Althea burned unto the prince's heart of Caledon. Anjou and Maine both given unto the French. Cold news for me, for I had hope of France, even as I have of fertile England's soil. A day will come when York shall claim his own. And therefore I will take the Neville's parts, and make a show of love to proud Duke Humphrey, and, when I spy advantage, claim the crown. For that's the golden mark I seek to hit. Nor shall proud Lancaster usurp my right, nor hold the scepter in his childish fist, nor wear the diadem upon his head, whose church-like humours fit not for a crown. Then, York, be still a while, till time do serve. Watch thou and wake, when others be asleep, to pry into the secrets of the state, till Henry surfeit in the joys of love, with his new bride and England's dear-bought queen, and Humphrey with the peers be fallen at jars. Then will I raise aloft the milk-white rose, with whose sweet smell the air shall be perfumed, and in my standard bear the arms of York, to grapple with the house of Lancaster. And, force perforce, I'll make him yield the crown, whose bookish rule hath pulled fair England down. So, he has a number of complaints here. He says that he's having to watch others squabble over winning or losing things that are rightfully his to begin with. He's also complaining that Henry Lancaster is unfit to be a king. And he also says that he's going to pretend to be on Gloucester's side, Humphrey's side, until the time is right. And I think the imagery of aiming for the crown as a mark to be hit is well-chosen imagery. It pictures the struggle for the crown as something of an archery contest in which many men may compete, but only one is going to claim that prize. And this imagery is carried over into the next scene that takes place between Gloucester and his wife, and we learn that she also is dreaming of the crown. She tells her husband, "Put forth thy hand and reach at the glorious gold." And Gloucester rebukes her for this. He tells her to banish the canker of ambitious thoughts. Now, a canker is a kind of sore or an ulcer that can arise either in flesh or on trees and plants. You might notice that the word is closely related to cancer, and that fits with how dangerous to the realm and to the individual Gloucester thinks that ambition is. It's a cancer. It's dangerous for those who possess it. He views it as a sickness that can lay low otherwise great individuals. And it's why he's never liked Winchester, because he sees him as a man of ambition. He accused him of it multiple times in the last play. And now, here's his own wife playing the part of the devil, whispering temptations into his ear. But again, the memory of his brother's triumph and glory is still shining in Gloucester's mind. He's not going to betray his nephew and his kingdom for personal glory. And so he chides his wife. He says, I don't want to ever hear you saying things like that again. And then he goes away. But Eleanor, his wife, she remains on stage, and she voices desires very similar to those that Shakespeare would later put into the mouth of Lady Macbeth. She basically says, I can't do more because I have to follow my stupid, weak husband's lead. But if I were a man, I'd wade through rivers of blood to get the crown for myself. So again, remembering that these were among Shakespeare's earliest plays, we can perhaps read Eleanor as a prototype for Lady Macbeth, who would come later. We then learn that she summoned a group of conjurers and witches to tell her prophecies of the future. And unlike perhaps Joan of Arc's ability to summon spirits in the last play, this isn't all entirely Shakespeare's invention. The historical Duchess of Gloucester did in fact consult astrologers to learn the fortune of the king, and to apparently taking potions from a witch that were supposed to help her conceive children. And like in history, like in the play, she was caught in the act. Apparently, this has all been a trap concocted by Buckingham and Winchester, and later on we'll see that York is in on it too, after he's been given a reason to be mad at Gloucester. They've paid the conjurer to do Eleanor's bidding, so that they'll have something to arrest her for that will reflect really badly on her husband. And the whole scene where they're summoning the spirits is rather odd. With Joan, it was clear that she knew she was conversing with fiends and offering blood sacrifices to achieve victory on the battlefield. It was pretty straightforward stuff. But here, at least the way it reads, the conjurers appear to be Christian. They harass the spirit in the name of God, And after it gives its prophecies, they call it a false fiend. So, if you know that the spirit is inferior to the God that you claim to serve, and if you're acknowledging that it's false, why are you listening to it? Why do you think that any good is going to come from it? But here we have it. And perhaps this is indicative of man's thirst for forbidden knowledge, right? Knowing the future before it happens is, of course, forbidden knowledge, in the sense that, I guess, getting the answers to a test before you take it is forbidden. It's a cheat. It's skipping forward. And the desire for this knowledge is temptation enough to lead people who profess to be Christians to disobey their own consciences in order to obtain it. And that's what Eleanor does here. And what does she get for her efforts? Riddles. She asks the spirit that's summoned 3 things. What shall become of King Henry? What shall become of the Duke of Suffolk? And what shall become of the Duke of Somerset? And the spirit gives answers to these questions, which York later reads. I'll run through them here. He's looking at the piece of paper where the answers have been written. He says, "What have we here? The Duke yet lives that Henry shall depose, but him outlive and die a violent death." Well, to the rest, he says a little bit of Latin there. I'm not going to pronounce that. He says, "Well, to the rest, tell me what fate awaits the Duke of Suffolk? By water shall he die, and take his end. What shall betide the Duke of Somerset? Let him shun castles. Safer shall he be upon the sandy plains than where castles mounted stand." Come, come, my lords, these oracles are hard, hardly attained and hardly understood. So York kind of poo-poos the whole thing. He says, this doesn't really make up much sense, and it wasn't worth the trouble that Eleanor is in now. But it's worthwhile for us to pause on these, because again, prophecies in Shakespeare every time do come to pass, but almost never in the way that the characters think it will. So this first one is perhaps the most mysterious of all. Does it mean that Henry will depose a duke, or that the duke will depose Henry? Again, it says, "The duke yet lives that Henry shall depose, but him outlive and die a violent death." Well, there's a bit of ambiguity there, isn't there? And this is the danger of prophecy in Shakespeare's plays. The clearest illustration of which, again, is present in the play Macbeth. The idea is that witches and fiends speak in equivocation. That is, the use of ambiguous language to conceal the truth. And we'll see that even the other 2 prophecies, which appear more straightforward, also come to pass with a unique twist that couldn't be anticipated. And we'll get to them a bit later. But for right now, Eleanor and the witches are arrested, and everyone knows that this isn't going to be good for Gloucester. After all, he's King Henry's right-hand man and his uncle. He's the protector of the realm and known for being good and just. And here's his wife engaged in witchcraft. One other important thing that happens in Act 1 is that Suffolk and Margaret, while taking a stroll together, encounter a group of petitioners from the city who are trying to get in to see Gloucester. Suffolk and Margaret say, "Well, maybe he's busy. Why don't you make your petitions known to us? We're just as good as Gloucester. We have just as much prestige and power as he does." And the commoners are hesitant because some of the complaints are, in fact, about Suffolk himself. And this also shows that the commoners trust Gloucester. He's the one that they come to for help, and the one who, to a good extent, commands their loyalty. And this is really important because it comes into play later. And we've already seen that he commands their loyalty to some extent in the last play, where his supporters were starting riots in the street, fighting against Winchester supporters. Suffolk and Margaret, by contrast, tear up the commoners' petitions and send them all away, not really endearing themselves to the people at all. Except there is one petitioner that they keep with them because they realize that they can use him for political advantage. It's an armorer's apprentice who is there to accuse his master of treason for saying that Richard, the Duke of York, is the rightful heir to the throne, not Henry. Now, who knows how the armorer came to figure this out? Maybe Richard has been floating the idea around London to see how it's received. Maybe the armorer is a friend of the Mortimer family. We're not really told how he knows. And he later denies having said anything like it. And York himself says that if he did say something like it, he should be punished for it. But Suffolk and Margaret, they don't really care about any of that. They want to get Somerset the position of the regent of France, and they know that this rumor is going to cast a shadow of doubt on York, too deep for King Henry to just ignore. Remember, Somerset and Suffolk have been allies since the last play. They both plucked the red rose. So when the court comes in and Henry is trying to decide between York and Somerset, who's going to be the regent of France, they drop this new piece of evidence, and Henry turns to Gloucester for advice. Now, we get the impression that, personally, Gloucester favors York over Somerset. Somerset is a member of the Beaufort family, and so he probably wants to keep him away from any position of power. But he's also a person who abides by law and order, and by justice, so he sides with Somerset after this news. Again, probably against his own personal preference, and he tells Henry to appoint him regent over France. And this might also explain why York, in the next scene, is working with Buckingham against the Duchess of Gloucester. Maybe that rubbed him the wrong way, and now he wants to get a bit of his revenge against Gloucester. So, in Act 1, we see the continuing chaos at court, and in closing, I'll point out again that King Henry here has nobody, with the possible exception of Gloucester, who is on his side, fighting for him. Everybody is fighting for themselves here. And all of this infighting is still building up and boiling over, and it's going to reach a breaking point next week. So, for next time, read Acts 2 and 3 of Henry VI, Part 2, and I will see you then.